Wyoming Territory, 1884. The sun hung low like a tired eye, bleeding gold over the dust-choked Main Street. Wind stirred the grid into slow spirals, brushing past creaking storefronts and shuttered windows. Folks lined the boardwalk, silent as gravestones, their eyes fixed on the man stepping out of the sheriff's office, with a shotgun slung lazily over one shoulder and a grin full of cruelty. Jed Broderick didn't hurry. He never had to. Behind him, 5 more followed, riders and black dusters, boots muddy with other men's blood. And on the wooden steps, still breathing but only just, lay Sheriff Hank Mallory. His badge shimmered in the dying light, slick with red. Caleb knelt beside his father, hand shaking, boots soaked through with the blood he'd never imagined could come from someone so strong. Just 17, bones still lean, eyes still too soft for a world like this. But they'd made him watch. Forced him to stand there while Jed shot Hank once in the gut and once in the chest, slow and deliberate. Jed spat in the dirt, glancing at the boy like one might glance at a mangy pup. "Too green to be worth a bullet," he said, and turned his back. The silence was heavier than the gunfire had been. Townsfolk turned away, doors closing like shutters in a storm. No one moved. No one dared. Caleb pressed his hand to the hole in his father's coat, but the blood kept coming. Hank's fingers reached up, trembling, and gripped Caleb's wrist. "You listen to me, boy," he rasped, voice rough as gravel. "You don't need to be fast, just right." Caleb's tears slipped silently down his cheeks. He nodded, but the words didn't land. Not yet. The badge fell from Hank's chest as he took his last breath, clinking softly on the wood like a nail driven into the boy's heart. They buried him on the hill overlooking the canyon. No preacher spoke. No guns fired in salute. Just wind and dirt and a sun left behind. Caleb stood over the grave long after the others had gone. He held the old Colt his father had stashed in the top drawer, the one no one but Caleb had known about. It felt too heavy in his hand. It didn't belong to him. Not yet. That night, he packed only what he could carry: the Colt, a blanket, a canteen, and the badge. Not to wear, not yet. He wrapped it in cloth and tucked it close to his ribs. The next morning, he was gone. Rode out before the sun touched the rim of the canyon, disappearing into the land that had raised legends and buried cowards. Weeks passed. Then months. Dead Man's Ridge kept breathing, but shallow and afraid. The Broderick gang made themselves at home. Hank's office became Jed's saloon. The jail house stood empty, a cracked monument to justice gone dry. No one spoke Caleb's name anymore. Most figured he died in the wild. Others hoped he had. Out there, a boy alone wasn't worth much more than a deer in a cougar's path. But Caleb wasn't hunting food. He was hunting time. In the canyons north of Fort Powell, there lived a man with more ghosts than stories, and more bullet scars than teeth. Ezekiel Kane. Folks said he once outed the devil himself and left brimstone smoking. No one knew why he vanished into the hills. But Caleb found him. Didn't knock. Didn't beg. Just stood by the fire, holding out the badge in silence. Kane squinted at the boy for a long while, then spat, and said, "You know what this'll cost you." Caleb only nodded. What followed weren't lessons. They were reckonings. Sunup to sundown, he fired until his knuckles split, until his fingers bled from reloading, until the Colt was no longer his father's but an extension of his will. He ran canyon walls until his lungs turned to fire, wrestled wolves and fell from cliffs, broke bones, set them himself. Ezekiel never offered praise. Only one truth: fast don't matter if your heart's crooked. You want to kill. Go die. You want to outlive the devil. Learn to outthink him. At night, Caleb didn't sleep. He sat with the badge in his palm, rubbing the edges smooth, whispering his father's words like scripture. You don't need to be fast, just right. By the time the snow melted off the peaks, Caleb had become something else. His hands didn't shake. His eyes didn't flinch. He could draw before thought reached the muscle. And so, 1 year to the day, a lone rider crested the hill above Dead Man's Ridge. The sun was just beginning to fall, same as it had when his father died. The wind kicked dust over his trail. His coat was plain, brown and torn at the cuff. The hat shadowed most of his face. The Colt rested low on his hip. Worn leather. Finger near the grip, never on it. The town didn't notice at first. Just another drifter, maybe. But when he stopped in front of the sheriff's office, now Broderick's drinking hall, and looked up at the cracked sign, a hush began to spread like smoke. He dismounted without a word, tied his horse slow. walked past the saloon swinging doors and right to the center of the street. Jed Broderick stepped out not long after, bottle in one hand, pistol in the other. He squinted. Well, I'll be damned. His men filtered out behind him, all smiles and whiskey breath. Look who came back from the wolves, one of them chuckled. Little badge boy in boots too big. Jed stepped forward. Caleb, ain't it? Thought you got swallowed by the hills. Caleb didn't answer. Just looked at the badge in his hand. Then clipped it to his chest, the same spot it had once rested on Hank Mallory's coat. The street grew still. No one laughed. Jed licked his lips. You here for vengeance, boy? Caleb's voice was quiet. I ain't a boy. Jed smirked. You ain't a man either. Caleb raised his eyes, slow and steady. No, I'm what comes after. And then he turned and walked away, just like that. Jed stared after him, unsure if he'd just seen a ghost, or something worse. Inside the saloon, one of his men muttered, He ain't even a man yet, just a boy wearing a dead man's badge. Jed didn't reply. His fingers tightened around the grip of his pistol. On the edge of town, Caleb stood alone, facing the cemetery hill. He didn't climb it. Not yet. He wasn't ready to look his father stone in the face. Instead, he whispered to the wind, Laugh while you can, Jed. I'll see you again. Behind him, the last light faded. No one in Dead Man's Ridge slept easy that night. Because deep down, they all knew. That boy didn't come back as a boy. He came back as a reckoning. The horse came down slow from the ridge, its hooves steering lazy clouds of dust that hung in the fading light like ghosts reluctant to leave. Saddle-worn and silent, the rider swayed with the rhythm of the trail, lean, sharp-shouldered, coat faded to ash, had low-over eyes that didn't blink much anymore. He rode with one hand near his holster, always. Not clenched, just close, like the weight of that Colt was part of him now. Dead Man's Ridge hadn't changed much in a year, but it looked smaller somehow. The same crooked fence lines, the same rusted weather vane spinning in the breeze like a drunk, the same church steeple watching everything without ever saying a word. But the feel had shifted. He could smell it. The town had surrendered, not in one moment, but slowly, like meat going soft in the sun. The rider stopped in front of the livery, tied his horse with a quiet pat on the neck, then walked into town like a shadow that hadn't made up its mind yet whether to stay. From the boardwalk, old men squinted. Women pulled curtains without realizing they had. A boy dropped his bucket at the well and just stared. No one spoke his name. Not at first. But whispers moved faster than spurs ever could. Could that be? Can't be. Looks like him. Just colder. That ain't the sheriff's boy. That's something else wearing his shadow. He didn't go to the cemetery. Didn't touch the hill where Hank Mallory lay beneath dust and weeds. Didn't say a word to the shopkeepers or the blacksmith who once offered him peppermint for helping stack coal. He just walked into the old boarding house near the edge of town, handed over coin without asking price, and took a room with a window that overlooked the saloon, the jailhouse, and Hank's old home, now stripped of its star, painted red, and occupied by devils in boots. He watched. Morning to evening, he watched. Sat on the porch, hands folded, eyes still. The townsfolk got used to seeing him like that, unmoving, unreadable, and always near. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. He didn't laugh. But his fingers twitched like snakes in the sun, small, unconscious flicks of muscle that seemed to measure distance, weight, timing. Some nights, he left town without a word and didn't return until dawn, dust in his hair, a new scar on his knuckles, the Colt always cleaner than it should have been. Once, the bell above the church door rang out at midnight. Folks thought it was the wind, until the pastor found a rope untouched and a bullet lodged clean through the iron tongue. Another night, a bottle flew off the saloon's balcony and shattered before it hit the ground. No one saw a gun, but everyone heard the echo. He never missed. Behind closed doors, people guessed. One swore they saw him split a card in half from 20 paces, just to test his edge. Another said he faced down 3 coyotes on the ridge without blinking, dropped them with 3 shots before they even crouched. Truth was, he hadn't come back for stories. In the high canyons beyond Fort Powell, he'd learned under a man who didn't believe in God or mercy, but could teach a bullet to curve. Ezekiel Kane. Some said he was dead. Others said death tried to take him and failed. Caleb had found him with nothing but a name and a badge wrapped in cloth. He didn't ask for help. Just stood there in the snow, holding out the badge like it was a question and an answer all at once. Ezekiel had laughed. Once. You want to shoot like lightning, he'd asked. Then you better learn how it feels to burn. And Caleb did. Every bone, every scar, every scarred knuckle bore that fire. He wasn't fast for the sake of it. He was fast because he had to be. Because time, out here, didn't forgive. Back in town, folks began to realize the stranger wasn't passing through. He was waiting for something to twitch. One afternoon, he stood outside the saloon, staring at the broken badge nailed above the door like a trophy. The wind carried laughter from inside, that same sour tone that once mocked a 17-year-old boy kneeling beside his father. Caleb didn't flinch. A voice came from behind him. An old man on a bench, pipe in hand, half blind from years of dust and regret. You come back for ghosts? He asked. Caleb didn't turn. The past is buried, he said. I just came to pay respects to the future. He turned and walked on. But inside, someone was watching. Jed Broderick leaned against the bar, sipping whiskey with slow satisfaction. His beard was thicker now, shot through with silver, but his grin hadn't changed. He watched from the window as the stranger disappeared behind the general store. One of his boys spat in the spittoon and said, "Ain't no way that's him. He's got steel in him now." Caleb was soft. Jed didn't answer. He just smiled. Outside, the wind picked up. Later that evening, the riders stood in the alley behind the boarding house, tossing coins into the air and drawing on their descent. Each shot cracked through the dusk like a whisper breaking glass. Each coin fell with a hole dead center. He picked up one, turned it in his fingers, and pocketed it. A souvenir. Or a reminder. Back in the saloon, the piano stopped. Jed wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Maybe," he said at last, "it's time we finish what we started." His men looked up, uncertain. Jed laughed. "You boys hear that?" They didn't hear anything. Jed just smiled. Exactly. The stranger wasn't making noise. And that meant hell was finally on the move. The saloon doors creaked wide at high noon, and in walked silence. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that crawls in on the back of a storm. Caleb stood alone just inside the doorway, hat low, shadow cast long across the warped floorboards. The clink of spurs echoed like a warning down the plank boards. Glasses paused midair. Cards hung frozen in gamblers' fingers. The piano player took his hands off the keys and quietly closed the lid. Jed Broderick sat at the center table like a king in his throne, boots on the chair opposite, a bottle sweating in the heat. His men flanked him, drunk, loud, grinning. The town's poison made flesh. But it was Jed who held the room. Always Jed. His eyes lit up like a fire being fed. Well, he drawled, standing slowly. "If it ain't the prodigal pup." Caleb didn't speak. Jed strolled to the bar, whistling something tuneless. He reached into his coat and pulled out a scrap of metal. Hank Mallory's old badge, bent and pitted, stained where blood had soaked in deep. With theatrical flair, he slapped it down onto the counter. Clink. "Thought you might want what's left of your daddy," he said, loud enough for every soul to hear. The room stayed still. Caleb didn't even look at the badge. His eyes stayed on Jed, unreadable. Jed leaned closer, smirking. "What's the matter, boy? Lost your bark?" He turned to the others. "Maybe we ought to check if he's even got the bite." The laughter started low, then rose like flies over a carcass. Jed's men surrounded Caleb, circling like bored wolves. "Sheriff's orphan," one hissed. "Badge polisher," another sneered. "Fancy hand with no kill," said a third, shoving Caleb in the shoulder. He didn't move. Another man slapped his hat off. It hit the floor with a whisper. Still, Caleb stood still. A statue built of restraint. Jed stepped closer, almost nose to nose. "Draw, boy," he said, slow and cruel. "Or crawl back to your daddy's grave." The tension cracked like dry wood. Even the air seemed to flinch. Caleb finally spoke, voice soft, steady as midnight snow. "I don't need to draw now," he said. "I just need you all to sleep well tonight." A pause. Then more laughter. The kind that covers nerves, masks fear, pretends to forget that death sometimes waits quiet before it strikes. Outside, the sun roasted the street to blisters. Inside, Jed leaned back and made a show of yawning. "You ain't foolin' no one," he said. "You're just a kid wearing dust in Daddy's last words." A chair scraped across the floor. From the corner, Sarah Lynn stood, tall, defiant, and trembling. She wore a faded black dress, same one she wore when she buried her mother, and her eyes didn't blink when she spoke. "Leave him be," she said. Jed turned slowly. Now, what would the Undertaker's daughter know about men's business? "I know cowards when I see them," she shot back. "They always laugh before they bleed." Jed's hand hovered an inch off his belt, but he let it fall. Sarah walked to Caleb, her step steady despite the eyes-burning holes in her spine. "You're gonna get yourself killed," she whispered. "They'll push you till you break." He looked at her, the flicker of something soft behind his eyes. "They ain't gonna kill me," he said. "They're gonna teach me what fear looks like, so I never wear it." Her hand touched his arm, light as a prayer. Then she was gone, back into the crowd, leaving only the scent of desert lavender and dust. Jed reached for the badge on the bar again, turned it in his fingers. "Tell you what," he said, voice slick with venom. "Let's give the boys something to aim at." That evening, as the sun sank low and the shadows stretched long, the Broderick gang hammered a post into the hard-packed dirt in front of the saloon. From its top they hung a rope, and from the rope, swinging slow in the breeze, they tied the sheriff's badge like a noose around a memory. It spun, catching light. By supper, every man, woman, and child in town had seen it. "Leave it there," Jed told them, grinning. "Let's see if our ghost has any guts left." Caleb stood in the window of his room at the boarding house, watching the badge turn on the wind. He said nothing, just cleaned his Colt slow, then laid it back in its holster without snapping the flap. That night, no one played music. No one drank loud. The badge creaked in the wind like it remembered how it once meant something. And somewhere down the street, a clock ticked slow toward reckoning. The moon rose like a bleeding eye over Dead Man's Ridge, casting the street in shades of crimson and shadow. Dust hung suspended in the air, unmoving, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The town was silent, windows shuttered, doors barred, lamps dimmed to slivers. Even the dogs didn't bark. No laughter spilled from the saloon. No boots echoed on the boardwalk. Only the badge moved, twisting on the noose like a cursed pendulum, silver catching red light with every sway. Caleb stepped out into the open, alone. His boots crunched on gravel, slow and deliberate. Coat flaring behind him in the breeze, head brim low, hand near the holster. His eyes never left the badge. Not once. He didn't glance at the figures lining the street, crouched in shadows and smirking behind rifles and whiskey breath. The Broderick gang had gathered, 8 of them now, spread along the storefronts like roaches waiting for a crumb to fall. One of them spat in the dirt. "He's come to hang with the badge, boys." "Don't look so pale, Caleb," another barked. "You'll be back with your daddy by morning." The third chuckled. "Hope he brought a shovel." But Caleb didn't slow. In the darkness of the alley across from the saloon, Sarah Lynn crouched behind an empty barrel, her hands tied around a small wooden cross she never used before. Her eyes glistened, locked on the lone figure stepping into fate with nothing but silence for armor. Caleb stopped beneath the badge. The noose swayed gently, the knot twisting like a serpent's eye. He reached into his coat, pulled a small knife from his belt, and raised it. Not a word, not a breath. With one clean motion, he cut the rope. The badge dropped into his hand, cold and gleaming like the night it had first fallen in blood. A bootstep cracked the stillness. Jed Broderick stepped out from the saloon doors, slow and sure, brushing his duster back with one hand to reveal the revolver at his side. His voice slithered across the street. "Pick it up and die, boy." Caleb clipped the badge to his chest. Jed's smirk vanished. Lightning didn't strike. Thunder didn't roar. But something did move, Caleb's hand. The Colt cleared leather faster than thought, flame spitting from its mouth as 3 men dropped before they could reach their belts. The fourth got his gun up, too late. Caleb turned his body sideways, bullet grazing his shoulder as he fired blind from the hip. The outlaw screamed and crumpled. A fifth lunged from the shadows with a knife. Caleb ducked, spun, and smashed the butt of his empty revolver into the man's face, bone cracking like dry wood. The sixth managed to fire once, missing by a mile, before Caleb pivoted, caught the weapon's glint, and launched his last bullet through the man's heart without looking. Smoke rolled off the Colt like breath from a predator. Then silence again. Only 2 remained, one crawling backward, clutching a shattered leg, the other frozen against the side of the barber shop, his gun hanging limp. Caleb reloaded. He didn't look at them. Didn't speak. His eyes were fixed on Jed. The gang leader's mouth twitched. Not a smirk now, Not confidence. Just calculation. He drew. But Caleb didn't fire. Not yet. I only brought one bullet with your name, Jed, he said, voice like ash on wind. I'm saving it. Jed's shot went wide. Caleb didn't move. Let the bullet pass as if death had already been refused. Then he raised his Colt, aiming not at Jed, but at the bottle on the saloon rail behind him. He fired. Glass exploded beside Jed's face. Shards rained over his shoulder. Jed stumbled, cursed, turned, and ran. Caleb didn't chase. Next time, he said, lowering the gun, I don't shoot to warn. The gang was broken. The town still quiet. But in the dark, someone screamed. Sarah. Caleb turned just in time to see Jed grab her from the alley. She struggled, fists flailing, but Jed struck her hard across the temple. Her body crumpled. He threw her over his shoulder and vanished into the alley with the speed of a jackal fleeing a wildfire. By the time Caleb reached the corner, all that remained was a trail of blood and dust leading toward the canyon beyond town. Red Vulture Canyon. Hell's doorstep. Caleb holstered his Colt. His badge glinted red. And without a word, he mounted his horse and rode into the night, toward vengeance, toward the canyon, toward the storm. The first light of dawn cracked open the sky like a wound above Red Vulture Canyon. Crimson streaks spread across the horizon, painting jagged stone with the color of old blood. The wind whistled low between the cliffs, a warning, or a memory. Caleb rode slow into the mouth of the canyon, the air growing colder with every step. The trail was narrow, littered with rocks that had no business falling on their own. His eyes scanned the cliffs above. Too quiet. Too perfect. Then came the first shot. It cracked the silence like a whip. The bullet struck the dust inches from his horse's hooves. Caleb leapt from the saddle, rolled, came up crouched with Colt in hand. Another shot rang out, this one sparking off stone beside his head. He didn't fire back. Instead, he moved, weaving between boulders, boots sliding across loose shale. He paused beneath a sharp overhang, heart calm, breath even, listening. The third shot never came, but the trap did. The next bend in the trail revealed it, a wire stretched tight, low across the path, near invisible in the shadow. Caleb knelt, brushed dust over it gently, then followed its line to a makeshift dynamite charge cradled beneath a slab of stone. He stepped around it. The canyon narrowed further, cliffs pressing in like closing fists. Up high, a figure moved, too fast for detail, but the glint of a scope was unmistakable. Caleb ducked behind a crag and waited. 1 minute. 2. A shout echoed across the canyon. That you, sheriff's pup? The voice was deeper than Jed's. Coarser. Wounded by years of smoke and bad choices. Come get your girl if you got the spine. Caleb didn't answer. He climbed instead, low and quiet, hands finding holds, boots whispering against the rock face. As he neared the upper ridge, he saw the men crouch by a boulder, rifle ready, a crude tattoo of a rattlesnake winding around his neck. Clay Broderick. Jed's brother. Bigger. Meaner. Slower. Caleb didn't draw. He pounced. They rolled across the stone, fists slamming, grunts echoing like drumbeats. Clay slammed Caleb's ribs with a knee, grabbed his throat, but Caleb twisted, drove his elbow into the man's chin, then his temple. Blood spattered the dust. Clay reached for the rifle. Caleb kicked it away, then straddled him, fist raised, ready to end it. Clay spat. Do it, boy. Put me down like your daddy should've. Caleb's knuckles trembled in the air, but the rage behind his eyes faded. No, he said, standing. I ain't you. And I ain't him. Clay stared up at him, stunned. You won't kill me. I won't carry you, Caleb replied. Crawl back, or die alone. He didn't look back. The canyon floor opened ahead, a sunless bowl of stone and silence, where echoes died fast and shadows clung like regret. At its center stood an old hunting shack, half swallowed by brush. Smoke drifted faintly from its chimney. Inside, he found her. Sarah sat tied to a wooden post, arms above her head, wrists bruised and bleeding. Her lip was split, and a welt darkened her cheek, but her eyes were sharp. Alive. Caleb, she whispered. He cut her loose without a word, catching her as she slumped. She gripped his coat, breath shallow, tears mixing with grit on her face. You came, she said. Always was coming, he murmured. Behind him, the door creaked. Jed stood in the threshold, rifle leveled. The two men faced each other for the first time without chaos between them. Just breath, and wood, and stone. Jed's eyes were colder than they'd ever been. But there was something else now. Not fear. Not yet. Reflection. Maybe. You look like him, Jed said. Caleb didn't move. You think the badge made him a hero? Jed's voice dropped low. No. It made him a target. Made him believe a lawman's death meant something. But it didn't. Just turned good men into corpses. Caleb held Sarah steady, one hand on her back. He believed people could change, he said. Even you. Jed barked a bitter laugh. We rode together once, he muttered. Me and Hank. Before he wore that tin star. We were boys in the war. Fought like devils, drank like fools. Watched friends bleed out in rivers that don't even have names now. He took a step forward, rifle still aimed. Then he put that badge on, and suddenly I was the devil he had to fight. He made me into this. No, Caleb said, stepping in front of Sarah. You chose this. You walked away from the war. You dragged it with you. Jed's face twitched. You took everything from me, Caleb continued, voice rising. Now I'm taking back my name. For a long time, the canyon held nothing but wind. Jed lowered the rifle, just a hair. You know what this is, he said. It was always gonna end like this. I know. Jed's eyes narrowed. We both draw at sunrise. No tricks. No words. Caleb nodded once, then helped Sarah outside. The shack creaked behind them. Above, the red light faded to gray as morning began to stir. And the sun waited, just beneath the edge of the world, ready to bear witness. The sun cracked over the canyon rim like a slow breath from God himself, pouring gold across the stone and staining the dust with firelight. Long shadows stretched like ghosts fleeing the earth, and the wind moved like it knew it was about to lose someone. At the mouth of Red Vulture Canyon, Caleb stood alone. His coat fluttered in the morning breeze, the sheriff's badge gleaming on his chest, no longer rusted or bent. It caught the light and threw it back like truth. Behind him, Sarah stood wrapped in a blanket, silent, her arms crossed tight, lips trembling, eyes never leaving him. Across from Caleb, 20 paces out, Jed Broderick rolled his shoulders. His coat was gone, revealing the vest of a soldier long buried beneath outlaw grit. His hand hovered near the grip of his revolver. No twitch, no bluff, just that same hungry stare he'd worn since war took the boy out of him and left a dog in his skin. No one spoke. Birds flitted overhead, startled by the stillness, scattering into the brightening sky. Sarah stepped forward, voice low, the last thing she could give. Don't blink, Caleb. He didn't nod. Didn't turn. His fingers flexed once at his side, then stilled. Time collapsed. A wind swept through the canyon, and in its rush, both men moved. Jed's hand shot down for his weapon. But Caleb didn't just draw. He answered. Smooth as breath, fluid as flame. His coal-cleared leather before Jed's fingers even kissed the grip. One shot. Sharp. Final. Clean. Jed's shoulder jerked back as the bullet tore through flesh and bone, spinning him sideways. His gun never cleared the holster. He dropped to one knee, clutching his arm, groaning in disbelief as blood seeped between his fingers and spilled down his side. Caleb stepped forward. Not fast. Not triumphant. Just certain. Jed looked up, pain creasing his face, but pride still burning. You could have ended me. Caleb looked down at him. No rage, no fear, just the kind of stillness that only comes from burying enough ghosts to understand their weight. Killing you would make me like you, he said. I ain't my father. I'm better. He turned, left Jed bleeding in the dust, his fury finally silenced by mercy sharper than any bullet. By the time Caleb reached Sarah, the wind had shifted. The canyon no longer hummed with danger. Only dust, fading echoes, and a sun that kept rising. They rode back slow, her arms around him, her breath steady against his back. Dead Man's Ridge stood quiet as they crested the hill, not just from fear, but reverence. Faces appeared in windows. Doors opened gently. The same people who once turned away when the Brodericks laughed now watched with open eyes as the sheriff's son returned, not as a boy, not even as a gunslinger, but as something forged and final. Caleb dismounted in front of the old office. The door still hung from one hinge. The bullet holes remained. He stared at it a long moment, then reached up and pinned the badge to the wood. He didn't step inside. He turned from it, the star left behind like a chapter sealed in blood and silence. Sarah waited by his horse. He walked to her, slow, without the weight he used to carry in his chest. She didn't speak. She just looked at him the way only someone who'd watched you walk through fire could, and still saw something worth holding. They mounted and rode out of town. Not chased, not cheered, just watched. And when they disappeared into the horizon, a voice, maybe from the porch, maybe from memory, whispered into the warming wind. He drew like lightning, but aimed like judgment. "I ain't here to be feared," Caleb had said. "I'm here to be finished." And in time, when folks told the story, around fires, over whiskey, across poker tables and between old men's sighs, they always ended with the same words. Outlaws laughed at the sheriff's son, until he drew faster than any gun in the West.